Welcome everyone. If I can ask you, unless you're speaking, to turn your microphone off so we can hear our speakers in a minute. I'm Sabina. I'm the head of EU and trade policy here at techUK, and I lead a series of webinars that we are doing looking at the world post-COVID. We've done a number of, probably 6 already. It's a weekly event, and we are kind of looking at the role of tech in the world post-COVID and how that shapes a lot of different sectors. So we've looked at healthcare, like the economy. We'll be looking next week, trade policy and various other things. So if you've been here before, thank you and welcome back. If this is your first event, please do come back, because we have a weekly conversation. So and it's likely to last for another 2 months at least. So definitely join us. Today we are focusing on cybersecurity, and I will pass over to my colleague Dan, who I'm sure a lot of you will know, who's leading our cybersecurity work at techUK and who will chair this conversation. So over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Sabina. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual techUK. Today we really wanted to have a broad-ranging discussion on the associated cyber challenges that have been posed and maybe heightened during this COVID-19 period. If I can, I'd like to have 2 related discussions throughout the session. So the first, perhaps the obvious one, as we all sit today at home, in my case, 300 miles from the physical office, we've all discovered not only new ways of working, but of living and doing day-to-day things. The resulting cyber challenges associated with that are obviously vast, and I'm sure we'll touch on what businesses have been doing and what perhaps they should be doing, what role individuals need to play in this period as well, and touch on as well how the cyber industry as a whole's fared during this time period in overcoming, some pretty long-standing challenges and debates almost overnight. The second discussion looked to the medium and longer term. So we're obviously moving into a new world. We're not going to go back to business as usual. And that new world's got a very different economic reality. And I'm keen to touch on questions there around how the UK cyber sector can retain those core strengths that it's had over the last few years, taking lessons from, what's happened in the last 3 months. And look to the future to support those SMEs that have perhaps been hit hardest by the kind of economic concerns, continue to promote growth and innovation across the sector, and also perhaps look at how the sector as a whole can support career changes into what we hope and believe will remain a growing sector going forward. To cover all that, I'm delighted to have 3 great speakers from across the sector. So Sian John, who leads Microsoft's strategy across EMEA and also chairs techUK's cyber programme. Raj Badiani, who leads Raytheon's digital practice. And James Sullivan, who heads up cyber research at the Royal United Services Institute. Before I invite everyone to make some brief opening remarks, I should just cover off the usual housekeeping stuff. Obviously, Sabina's covered off the muting thing, so please do that. I'll make sure during the Q&A later that anyone who's dialed in on the phone has ample time to ask questions. And throughout the session, if you want to ask a question, you can now raise your hand on Teams after the weekend. And also, if you want to put any questions in the chat as we go out, I'll make sure those get asked as well. So without further ado, and because she does chair the cyber programme, I'll ask Sian to go first, I think.
I suspected I might end up going first, so thanks, Dan. So in terms of the topic, one of the things I want to talk about is obviously from the perspective of working at Microsoft, we've seen an acceleration of some of the things we've been working with customers for over the last few years, is how you evolve some of the ways that you do security from a traditional on-premise focus, where all the security controls very much sit within from the organization out. So you have to be in the premises either physically or routing back in through virtual private networks, and then having a very mature security stack at the perimeter. That's something that's been been stressed for quite a lot of years as we moved to more of a collaborative environment, sharing information and data leaving organisations. And then with the rise of mobile networking and cloud, that's created some challenges in terms of how people do that maturely and keep some control. And we were on that journey with quite a lot of customers, particularly as they move from maybe on-premise Exchange from Office 365 in our case.
Is now joining.
Yeah, even to other cloud services. It's like, how do you actually evolve your control framework from an on-premise focused approach into something that can deal with remote working? What's actually happened with COVID-19 is it's just accelerated that to a large degree. So yeah, most of the people that I was working with were already on that journey, but they were on that journey either early stages or mid stages, and then suddenly having to send the majority of the company home. It just put a lot of stress on that environment, to things like, how do you do secure connectivity without actually overloading things like VPN servers and devices. There's been a lot of challenges around that. So that's how do you actually enable people to work remotely, maybe even having to do things like bring your own devices. People have to use their own devices to be able to get home, allowing people to work from their own houses where there may be other, children doing schoolwork, playing games, other risks like that happening, and making sure you've got the controls. Now, the technology exists. The challenge we've had is it's a big step to make that change, and I think it's one thing that's being highlighted today, how that has just increased risk when you're suddenly having to make a lot of change very quickly. And the real aim now is to make sure that we can go back and look at what we're doing to make sure that we have adapted to be able to have the control in the right place, which may not always be in the on-premise environment. It may be there to help people work remotely. And I think that's the real challenge now, because even if this comes to an end, many people will go back to work, but what's actually come is people that have never really worked from home suddenly realizing that there are some benefits to it. So I think even if we do go back to the office, it's not going back to work because everyone's working anyway. Even if we do go back to the office, I think this remote working is going to become much more normal, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So that's my initial thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Shan. I think we'll save any questions until after everyone's spoken. So, Raj, can I invite you up next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Raj, and I'm head of digital at Raytheon UK. Digital offers customers in both the public sector and private sector advisory services around three distinct areas: cyber, data science, and emerging technologies. But I'll save myself from the shameless company plug there and get down to business. I think Shan has actually covered off a lot of some of the key challenges already, which we're finding. But I think there are also some of the biggest challenges around COVID-19 has really been some of the social and economic challenges. We have a lot of people who have been displaced from cybersecurity roles and IT roles in general. And also, we're all human beings, or at least I hope we are. People have families that they need to look after, they need to do the weekly shop, and therefore the risk of infection does cause CISOs some nightmares in the sense that their key personnel could potentially be off for a long period of time. But any global company or even an SME that has links across the globe is used to using video conferencing type capabilities. But for those who are fairly small or who are more office based, like those in the financial services where traders have multiple screens, the thought of going to working from home has caused CISOs some anxiety around sourcing the right type of laptops or IT asset and monitors. And I know in the first 2 weeks of this crisis, my wife works in financial services, and we couldn't find a monitor on Amazon for life or money. So I think from that perspective, there are key challenges around the social and economic piece, but also there is infrastructure issues as well, which Shan's also sort of highlighted in her introduction. Being able to scale up, VPN and gateways, being able to have infrastructure that has actually been tested enough so that the entire company can work from home. These are all areas which companies, quite frankly, before this weren't actually set up to do. And some of us are working from home, but actually some of us are key workers who are going into environments, particularly at Raytheon, where we have our manufacturing capability. We also have a consideration to look at our operational technology to ensure it's safe. And manufacturing, as we've seen this week and last week, is kicking off again in the UK, and therefore those operational technology cybersecurity practices need to also be considered. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Raj. And finally, James.
Hi there, everyone. Hello. I'm James Sullivan. I'm the head of cyber research here at RUSI. So we look at the strategic challenges for cybersecurity, conduct a lot of research, but we try to blend that with the technical concepts that we have to do in this space. So during these strange times, I'm going to try and share with you, we put together, obviously, once lockdown happened, we put together some work on COVID-19, and I'm going to share with you what I think are 6 fundamental challenges that we have to face in terms of the sector. So I'll rattle through them now. I think the first one is definitely to do with the volume of cybercrime. So there's clearly going to be a surge of online fraudsters exploiting this pandemic for their own gains. We've seen a number of advisories released, whether it's from the NCRC, Europol, or Interpol. I'm sure we've all looked in our inboxes and seen various forms of social engineering and on increase. I definitely have in my own. So I think one of the questions there is, is this an increase because of new threat actors, or is it just the same threat actors doing, the same things again, just repurposing themselves? I think it's the latter. I think it's just the same groups continuing to do this. And also, we've seen a particular focus there on the healthcare sector with some particular vulnerabilities, which has shone the spotlight on that. So I think that's very interesting, and we did some work on that as well. And then finally, data privacy and that cybercrime bucket as well is very, very important. And we could probably talk about the UK's contact tracing app all day in terms of that. So NCRC is doing a lot on that at the moment. So that's my first one. The second area really is to do with security vulnerabilities with remote working software. Zoom has been a massive focus. In many ways, it was kind of a victim of its own success, a number of flaws, but particularly because it was such a quick march towards its use in the last couple of months, that there was just stuff all over the internet about Zoom. They've actually entered I don't know what day they're at, but they've entered a 90-day upgrade policy area where they're just focusing on upgrades, security only, not introducing anything new. But I mean, we're all moving to all of these new platforms. IT has been built for the office environment in many ways. I think the most important thing here is really when we're making decisions in organizations to have an effective cyber risk management strategy. So a lot of decisions have been rolled out very, very quickly here because of the need, and we have to balance security and efficiency. But actually, we should be making these decisions based on a framework, not, oh, quick, I need a Zoom account, let's set one up. Is Zoom fit for purpose? I'm picking on Zoom here, but it could be the house party app I seem to remember I signed into once. I kind of regret that, and there's plenty more. So that's my second one. The third, hostile state activity. I think quite clearly there are new opportunities here for intelligence gathering, disinformation campaigns, surveillance of citizens. Don't get me started on that. And we're going to see definitely going to see some sort of increase, or at least repurposing of how hostile nation states conduct their activity, because there probably are a lot of opportunities. Fourthly, pressure on cyber investment. So we're still a long way from understanding the economic implications of COVID-19, so it's a bit hard to really predict what that is. But we're here at RUSI, we're looking at future UK cyber strategy. So the current strategy runs out in 2021. What happens next? Now, we conducted this research with a lot of ambitions for what we think should happen next, but that has to be backed up by investment. So I think the economic implications of this are very important. The integrated review has been delayed, which looks at something to do with the UK's international role as well. So it's really important that we don't scale back our investment. We keep pushing forward, but those questions need to be answered. And I think we touched upon supporting SMEs and supporting the sector, and really not snatching defeat from the jaws of victory here. So that's important. Fifth, and I'm not going to pronounce it like Donald Trump, China. So China is a big aspect of this. Its role in the pandemic is under scrutiny. Whatever your politics are, whatever views you take, that there's going to be some scrutiny. So this really does move over into the tech sector as well. We've seen the 5G decision, that was made on 28th of January, backed up by quite a lot of details. Perhaps that might change now. There are other areas of tech as well. So the 5G thing is really a snapshot of broader cooperation and our relationship with China, and where the tech sector and cybersecurity are fundamental. And finally, that ties into what we call the globalization of technology. So that's to do with supply chains. There's going to be a big spotlight on UK global supply chains, where we source everything from. There's a concept called sovereign capability, which comes up a lot. We'll see this with tech and cyber as well. How much of this can we bring in-house? My assessment is probably highly unlikely. It's a bit unrealistic. We are reliant on these global supply chains, but certainly COVID-19 will make us revisit that. So I think that's kind of mix of some like the short-term stuff, but I think it's really
Unknown participant is now joining.
I think it's really important to focus on those long-term things as well. So thank you.
Cheers, James. So yeah, as with all these things, always your questions are always better than mine. So please do put them in the chat and raise your hand if you'd like to ask one. While you do that, I'll just ask one of my own first up. So I wanted to focus the first one around people. So obviously, as soon as lockdown hit, we all jumped online to work. We were all stuck in his house, jumped online to do everything else, socialise, whatever. And it's interesting that kind of quick jump to platforms that maybe you were, a bit apprehensive of before have now quickly become a big part of everyone's lives. So I'm interested to dig a bit deeper into that kind of balancing act between, in that immediate term, did security come as a bit of an afterthought for people, and how, while people are, miles away from the office where maybe they get most of the cybersecurity training, how can we kind of make sure we square that circle? Don't know who wants to go first. Sian?
Yeah, I will say that I think in that first week or two, there was definitely that challenge of get people working versus secure them. And it wasn't like security was on the back burner. It was, we know we've got to do it, but we've got to get people working first. So I think there was definitely a 2 to 3 week period at least of getting people up and running, and then the security workload is maybe working in parallel. We definitely saw that with the adoption of some of, from perspective of getting people onto Teams, get people onto Teams first. Obviously, I can say without being too much of a pitch that obviously doing that with Microsoft, there's obviously we're slightly more mature than some of the other offerings that have been mentioned in terms of that. But there's certain things that maybe if you were set up for authentication, for control of files and things like that from an on-premise perspective that people maybe weren't ready for. So the first step was get it running, but then actually in parallel start thinking about how we roll out the security. So there was definitely that tension, and suddenly everyone had to work from home, of how do we do security. And I'd say that our team spent a lot of time in the first 2 weeks when people's VPNs were falling over, helping them to implement split tunneling for Office 365. So they could at least say everything goes to the corporate, but we can actually at least take the office traffic away, which was what was killing a lot of corporate connections. So there was that dichotomy. I don't think it was don't do security. I think it was we need to do security, but we actually need to get people productive first.
James?
Yeah. So I mean, clearly the pressure of the last few weeks means that organisations are going to take more risk with their tech and what they use. A lot of the admins need to have good settings, so there's good admin control over what we use. So I think there's another point as well. It's about the types of conversations we have on these platforms, and really training staff to really gauge the level of conversation that they're having and under what context. And that's something you can't control technically, really. It's I'm talking now and I could start talking about anything I wanted, really, so I'm free to do that. So really staff really gauging when they're having a conversation on a certain platform, what that means. And so there's probably a lot of repurposing to do in that aspect. So it's not just the technical aspect, it's more there's people element to it as well.
And Raj?
Yeah, just touching on the people element, it's actually a culture shift as well, because some people don't like to use these online platforms and show off their video. But also, you know, from a communication perspective, there's also a lot of controls you have to put in place to ensure that classified information is not being shared through bring your own devices and shadow IT. Ultimately, people will revert back to using their personal devices if they have access. And then therefore they will start to become a bit more relaxed, because IT and CISOs will have to relax controls. But I think technology has played a big part, particularly for Raytheon, where we have customers within all parts of government, and you know, with people operating at certain security classification, we've had to adopt more cloud services, and we've had some success in spinning those up at fairly short notice for some of our customers. But again, I guess the other side is it wasn't just us in this situation. Everyone is in this situation. So we're all having to deal with poor, you know, sort of connections and working from our kitchen tables and having kids running around. So the first 2 to 3 weeks have been very, very challenging. But I think the biggest challenge is around embracing that culture of remember that you're still working when you're at home, and therefore keep conversations and sending of materials in line with security policies and company policies.
Well, thanks. We've got 2 questions, I think, in the chat. Well, raised hands, hopefully on purpose. Kat Summer.
God, there's just a point where it all falls down. There you go. I was just wondering around sort of looking to the future. Everyone's talking about digital adoption and how brilliant it is and how it should be supported, and you know how it's increased productivity. There is, I think, a concern that if digital resilience and security and cybersecurity isn't addressed as part of that, we're just creating an additional layer of technical debt and legacy debt on top of the stuff we already have and on top of the stuff that we're currently creating as everyone's rapidly had to move. If I had the answer, I wouldn't ask the question about what sort of incentives do you think government can create and an industry and supply chains can create to encourage that twinning of digital adoption and digital resilience and cybersecurity.
Raj, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, why not? Thanks for the question. I think we need to learn from other industries, because I mean, in the industry I work in, defence and security, it's very much office-based, and things are naturally locked down from a cybersecurity perspective. But other industries within the UK and globally, like the media or the arts and culture, they've been using this type of technology for years, because video conferencing is not anything new. Working from home is not anything new. So I do think we need to capture what other industries are doing and almost present that back to government, if that's the right route, to get them to actually allow and embrace this culture of working from home. Because ultimately, I think people are going to get used to it now, and everyone's got you know, the whole work-life balancing to think about. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my take on it. I think we should look at other industries and learn from how they're using these you know, type of tools. Yeah.
Sean?
I think what's happened today with the raising the awareness around some of the issues, I think it was at NCRC being on the news today, I think actually making people clear that these issues exist is one step. Yes, I'd say something around, you know, procurement and supply chain, but the challenge is if you're actually going to do things digitally transform, the minute you've got a standard or something like that, it's invariably out of date. I think some of the sort of principles, so I like things like the NCRC's 14 cloud principles in terms of what you need to do from a security perspective. That sort of guidance and consultancy and driving, particularly, I think, relating to what I think will be the next question about around SMBs, when you're getting outside of large enterprises. So, you know, a large enterprise will quite often go to their vendor and get a lot of engagement in terms of how they offer things. The more that you can get government sort of trying to provide advice, guidance, enablement, and maybe making it that security is built into what we offer as core. I know that's obviously key for ourselves, is to try and make security more baked into what you do and more available and easy to use, but people actually have to choose to turn it on. So, you know, if you we try to do things with Secure Score to nudge people on in terms of enabling things, but sometimes actually a little bit of a push from if not government agencies, just information, just to try and create that culture of making sure that people, you know, think about the threats with the opportunities. One of the things I talk about a lot is that security people, we only ever think about the threat, and the business only thinks about the opportunity, and we actually need to both think about both. So the security people, we need to think about how we enable you to digitally transform rather than stop it. But from the business point of view, digital transformation means building security into everything you do, really, to make it capable of doing. So it's a bit long-winded, but.
James?
Yeah, interesting. We talk about the role of government, and you know, obviously we now live in a society where government has intervened in our lives quite dramatically, and we're sort of more reliant on government than, you know, we were last year, certainly. And you know, we every day we wait for government to tell us what to do or what not to do and critique that. And I think, you know, when we look at the last strategy, the cyber one, that was quite interventionist as well. So you know, there's limits of government intervention. There's only so much government can do. So if we build that kind of around, you know, if we're looking at a new strategy and, you know, are trying to answer this question, I think, you know, and it'll be a soundbite, but it's got to have depth. You do need a whole of society kind of response to, you know, the cyber challenges ahead. But what you've got to do is then get beyond that soundbite. Otherwise, it just is just a poster, and go, actually, what does that mean? So is government, we've touched upon the NCRC, is that just guidance? Probably. Or does the NCRC intervene? I think it's more guidance, and it's about dishing out that responsibility and going, well, actually, you know, this is, in this environment, this is what this certain part of the private sector needs to do. This is what this sector needs to do. And it's got to be, you know, really prescriptive, outlining those responsibilities, setting out that vision. You know, the government can set out the vision for what standards, guidance, incentives can look like, but essentially it really is now, I think it's a move away from saying, please government help, and saying, well, actually, you know, it's up to the whole of that cyber community to really set the tone for what happens in the next decade and beyond.
Thanks, James. Don't know if you want to come back on that, Kat. Oh, you're on mute, I think, but no.
Oh, dear God. There you go. No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
No worries. Before I take Steve's question, because he's got his hand up, just a quick one for Shan and Raj, I think. Obviously, try to take a positive from a pretty bleak situation. How far accelerated, how far down the line do you think we are in terms of adopting these tools like Teams than we might have been if the pandemic hadn't hit?
Right, you can make me try and remember the stat now, because I think in the first 3 weeks, I think we added something like 44 million active users to Teams, and there's something like 96 billion minutes of calls going on every day. And I'm doing that from memory, so I apologise if those stats are wrong, but it's a massive adoption, and this is, you know, customers that were even looking at it were still in pilot phase and suddenly went from pilot phase to full rollout. So it's absolutely driven it. In some cases it's new, but in many others it's accelerating steps that people are already on. Just you know, people were at the beginning of a project where they were maybe moving to Teams or to more remote working and Office 365, and actually the situation just accelerated that. That's definitely a thing we've seen from our side, a massive acceleration. And obviously we mentioned Zoom, but the same things happened on the Teams perspective. So and we have got the stats out there, and I'm doing it from memory, so I apologise if I've got them wrong, but it's lots were added very quickly.
Raj, is that something you're seeing with your clients as well?
Yeah. So we are seeing a lot of our clients are moving to these type of platforms. But as I say, you know, where you're dealing with sort of classified information, you need to ensure that there's controls in place to allow you to have certain conversations. And sometimes it's just not possible. But I mean, even internally as a business, you know, we've had to adopt these tools in order to, you know, carry on working and keep the lights on. But there are some there is some education and training needed for staff to get the best out of the tools and how to use them in the right way. And you know, ultimately, some of these tools have a lot of limitations as well. Let's be honest of that. So you know, I don't think there's one-stop shop. But you know, at least for us in the short term, we're going to have to consider using these tools. But it is interesting when you use the tools and you're trying to engage with either new prospects or existing clients. You know, what is the equivalent of a free coffee or free beer, which you would normally have if you met them face to face? So things like thought leadership and engaging with clients in that you know, context, we're finding is a great way to keep the conversation going, because we all know customer budgets are going to be hit this year. But just keeping the conversation going through this type of engagement, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think from a personal perspective as well, it's, you know, as many people on the call know, techUK's tech's not always been the best. So it's good to have kind of squared that circle and got past that. But that the kind of face-to-face thing is something that we're now struggling with as a kind of a challenge to recapture that, the value in those face-to-face relationships that, you know, we kind of convene as an organisation. Steve Lamb, got a question?
Hi, yes, please. Hi, guys. Thanks for a really interesting session. I think Raj just touched on this, and Sean did as well, and James. But I've got an observation and a question. The question is, given risk management is well understood by security professionals, I've done it for years. I know you guys have as well, and many on the call. Any thoughts on how we get people to actually do more on security in this context? And you've outlined all the reasons why risks increased and all the need for that as well. The observation is, in this session, it's on Teams, it's a great platform, we're very capable. And yet, as a delegate, I'm able to mute people, throw people out the session, let people in the lobby into this meeting. Now, I'm not being disruptive and I'm not trying to knock the session, but I can do that right now. I think it's a case in point of a really well-intended session with great content. It happens all the time. I see it not just in this environment, I see it in day-to-day. I'd just love to get your thoughts of kind of how do we get security back up the agenda in critical things?
Yeah, and obviously we do have the capability that you can set it that can't happen. But then that's a sort of an engagement versus who you're going to make a presenter versus an attendee sort of approach. And one of the things is actually the move towards more people being presenters, because it makes it, and it's almost like a more collaborative engagement, because even face-to-face, one person can disrupt the room, whereas so that there is the fact that the capability is there to be able to lock it down. I notice a lot of people aren't, but I think in terms of actually kicking people off the room, that's disruptive rather than losing data. But you can actually see, you can see they can actually choose who they're going to let into the meeting. And one of the things is one of the subtle changes we've seen is moving away from video conferencing being very much a dictatorial thing to being much more collaborative. Now, it's something that we were already doing in Microsoft, not surprisingly, so it's not actually impacted us too much. So that's one of the easier side. The other side is in terms of file sharing and engagement and the things that Raj was saying about knowing about what you're sharing and what's appropriate to share. And there's plenty of funny conversations going on Twitter about inappropriate family members walking in various stages of dress around the back of people, which is on a different level of risk management. But I think it just goes back to the thing we're talking digital transformation in general. Is too often we talk in the negative side for the risk management because we see all the threat. We need to, and it's a conversation we've been having for what, 5 or 6 years, that we need towards more of being that consultant in terms of engagement, in terms of actually making that risk be owned by the business, because too often they own the opportunity and they leave the threat to technology, to IT. So they get all the benefits. They go, oh, security's getting in the way of me rolling it out. And it actually needs to be, in order for me to do this, I need to have these controls in place. But to do that, those controls have to be adapted to the way of working. They have to fit in. If the controls require you to do things that break a lot of the benefit of the digital transformation, people will engage with them. That's what drives shadow IT. People put so many agents on a device that they lock it down to the point that it's almost unusable and slow, so someone gets their own iPad or their own laptop out. I can almost directly draw a correlation between the locking down of what people can do. It's different in a regulated industry like defence, where people get it. In the more general industry, if you really, really lock down someone's work device and their access, there's almost a direct correlation between that lockdown and the use of personal cloud file sharing, personal devices, because people literally go, I will do my day-to-day job on my personal device, and I'll use the corporate device when I absolutely have to. So that's why I think we need to have that transformation, more mature approach. And actually, another part of that risk management we need to talk about now is actually burnout. So one of the things we're noticing, and happened a lot in the early days, is just going back to the coffee and the beer. If you're in back-to-back conference calls, it's very easy to schedule 9 till 5 back-to-back. And so there's the security risk, but we're actually seeing a lot of personal productivity risk. It's a real focus on Microsoft, telling everybody to go take your lunch, tell everyone to have a break. And it's actually something when you look at the stats of how people engage with teams and things like that, obviously we don't get specifics, but we can see that the level of back-to-back meetings is gone massively up, which is why you're getting things like automatically scheduling a meeting for 5 minutes shorter than an hour and all that sort of features coming in. So that risk management is, yes, a security thing, but we actually have to think about mental health and personal awareness risk as well when it comes in. Sorry, I'm so long.
James or Raj, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I touched upon cyber risk management at the top. I think it's quite interesting how many, people don't really understand the principles of what cyber risk management is trying to achieve, what the kind of process is. So, you either trust something or you don't. It's very binary, and that's not what cyber risk management is. You've got a degree of confidence in something. You're more prepared to use one platform than another, but you're not eradicating all of your risk. You're just saying, okay, well, in this context, this would be better. So I think that kind of what's an acceptable risk, what mitigation methods you got to develop, I think that's just not articulated enough. It's not understood more widely. It's very surprising. I mean, I saw that with the work we did on the Huawei stuff. It was just phenomenal how it just became, you either trust something or you don't, and you can't build in controls. Of course you can in anything you build in those controls. So I think that's really important, that it's not a binary discipline, cyber risk management. I agree with Sean that too much security renders something unusable. I've seen that at RUSI, to be honest. It's quite frustrating, but you have to do it. I think that's where the NCRC guidance is actually quite important, because a lot of people will cover their backs by following the NCRC guidance, because then they can just point to something and go, right, they told me to do that. Well, actually, that guidance also needs to include efficiency as well as security, because that's just true. Because actually, as Sean said, security falls down when something isn't efficient. You just go and use something else.
Raj?
We've got to have a level of productivity as well. We can always use these tools, but if they're locked down to the point where you can't actually get any use of it, it's just another application or application estate. I also think collaboration tools as of late, particularly within the COVID-19 sort of pandemic, there was a lot of fake news going around, through some of these collaboration platforms. And it's very clear that actually people, particularly those who are either locked down at home or in self-isolation, actually will then, it might affect someone's mental health. And, with it being Mental Health Awareness Week, I think it's important that, on Sean's point, that actually people are told to go for lunch and people are not doing longer hours than they should, because it's quite easy to do that, especially now. You look out the window, it's fairly bright, and it will stay like that until about 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock. So it's very important that as much as these tools are being used to collaborate, they shouldn't be, locked to our ankles, and we use them to death. Yeah. That's a bit extreme, sorry.
Thanks. Next question, I think Kiran Bagotra's got one. I think you put it in the chat, but do you want to expand on it?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can hear me. Yeah, I've popped it in the chat, but just, I guess, expanding on it was that I started to notice we do a lot for SMBs, small and medium businesses, and we're a cybersecurity comparison website for SMB, so I wouldn't particularly say that we count as a cybersecurity vendor. And I would say before COVID-19, I was starting to see SMBs increasingly turning to their trusted advisors, like banks, accountants, telecoms, for what they saw as cybersecurity advice. And I'd say with the exception of possibly Microsoft, Zoom, and VPNs, they seem to be turning increasingly to those sort of advisors. Would the panelists agree with that? And do they have stats that say that they agree that, you know, all the banks have got cybersecurity pages now, and they've been forced to put up cybersecurity advice alongside business support advice, because all the SMBs are going, right, we need a loan. You know, where can I get a COVID business interruption loan from? And then they're asking about cybersecurity alongside that. And I'm probably going to be a bit cheeky saying that I don't necessarily think a lot of SMBs would turn to the NCRC guidance to work out what they want, what they see as cybersecurity. And my fear is that SMB's version of cybersecurity now is phishing, a VPN, and the EasyJet hack, and everything else that the rest of us have probably tried decades to help them understand has possibly been washed away over the course of COVID-19. But I don't want to sound like a mega pessimist. I'm just intrigued by what the panel's view on that change in tide is.
Thanks, Kieran. Raj, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I think you raise a really, really valid point, and I think the reason you have that is because a lot of vendors will often try to just, and I'm probably going to get loads of raised hands now, but they'll probably just try to tell you technology, right? Whereas actually, kind of what you need to do really is look at your people and your process piece first before going through that sort of technology deep dive. But you know, you raise a good point, because the NCRC is not going to be the first port of call for some of these small to medium-based enterprises. They would look for local advice. So you know, be that through you know, people like techUK or Chambers of Commerce, or you know, organisations like that. I do think there needs to be more of a regional strategy around cybersecurity in the UK as well, because certain regions in the UK will have more risks than others. So, you know, London having a financial hub, to the north of England with all of the manufacturing happening in, say, Workington, you know, where you know there's a big name there. So I would like to see a UK government regional strategy, and maybe the answer is those SMBs go to their local councils or local regional sort of offices in order to get that advice as part of wider business advice on you know, how to build an extension to your office or where to buy office chairs. You know, have it almost like a service involved in a regional level is what I would say. Yeah.
I know that banks and insurance companies were already looking very much at how they can extend the services they offer to small businesses in terms of how they can give advice around cybersecurity. So I'd see the role of something like NCRC guidance being that informs the guidance that somebody like a Chamber of Commerce or a bank or an FSI should work with. It's also something they're talking to us a lot about in terms of, you know, recommendations for security on Office 365, for example, or on Windows, and things that they can be passing on as best practice. I know it's a conversation that we have a lot with them, and the more we can make that easy, those of us that are platform vendors, the more we can make it easy to turn security on and turn things on by default, better. It's not always easy, because some of that stuff needs policy decisions, to Raj's point, that if we were to turn it on in the technology without them deciding what they're going to do with it, there's an issue. But little things we've done over the time is default to, if you get an Office 365 account now, it will default to enabling MFA, as opposed to it being a choice, to try and force, because that's the biggest risk from a phishing perspective. So we can force that. Yes, there are challenges. I do think that actually, if you, and it's not just about Microsoft, it's about any of the vendors. If you think about over the last 5 years, as people have moved to cloud services as a small business, that actually, and I think we see cloud services much more used in small businesses than they are in bigger corporates. That actually, although there's more exposure, there's actually slightly less risk than the traditional model, which was a server stuck under somebody's desk that never got updated, never got patched, and then never had to remotely connect back into it. I mean, if you're the right sort of industry, like a small business that's, I don't know, a pub, or no, that's really bad to use pubs and hotels in the economic climate. If you're a small business there was maybe a shop that's now got an online presence, you know, that's a lot easier to do now than it was 5 years ago. Actually, even some of the pubs, they've gone online and started to sell beer online and things like that. So it's a lot easier to do now than it would have been 5 years ago, because 5 years ago you'd have had to be much more technically capable to do it. And so I think you're right, they're not going to go to NCRC. They might go to Get Safe Online, possibly, but not really. It's about the Chamber of Commerce, the bank, the insurance person providing advice, and then about those of us that do provide the technology, providing very quick guides that are focused at people that are not technology people to enable them to do it. And I'll be honest, we try and do that well, but we could probably do a much better job than we do going forward as well. So,
well, we do that on Protect, so I can help on that one. Sorry, I had to get that shameless plug in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what organisations like yourself exist, though, isn't it? To try and give that advice and help people to do the right thing.
James, should we just pick up on that kind of regional strategy issue? I know that RUSI were really involved in the kind of early stages for the next iteration of the national strategy, and obviously that's kind of in limbo as government deal with a crisis that covers all departments. Do you just want to touch on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that all ties in with my point of like trying to decentralize it and not just looking for like one person to hold your hand through all of this and going into different points. I think the big question there is, you know, we've sort of brought together, we talked about cyber risk management and now we're talking about incentives, and there's lots of work on that, on the kind of socio-technical aspect of cyber risk management. How are you going to encourage someone to go to the right place to get information? Because there might even be information available, but they're just not going to go there and they're just going to carry on running their business without the necessary cybersecurity. So those incentives are really important. One of them we're looking at is, and this is not a plug, you know, completely neutral on this, I've yet to decide, is the role of cyber insurance and how you know, that's been seen as kind of like, you know, the kind of golden ticket towards, you know, delivering good cybersecurity. You take out your cyber insurance policy, you get given, you know, all of your risk management training, and that's it, great. And you know, you'll never have to claim for a payout because you're nice and secure. You know, so is that, you know, is that true? To what extent is cyber insurance the way forward, or are there other incentives that we need to put in place? So yeah, I don't work for a cyber insurer, so that's, I promise you, that's not a plug. But yeah, it's very important to really work out what the big incentives are, even start ruling things out and just say, well, actually, we thought that was an incentive, but no, that doesn't work. And really trying to get that, and you know, local level kind of collaboration is clearly, you know, a very important part.
Thanks, James.
If I can make a quick comment on that last cyber insurance piece, and this is not a shameless plug either, but the one partnership I managed to close in week 2 of lockdown was an insurer in India who has a UK office, who I have been trying for over a year to do a partnership with. As soon as we COVID-19 went through the roof, they came in and said, we want to bundle you up with our new insurance product. And that hasn't been shelved because they're getting so many quick inquiries, even in India, which is, you know, they've got presence in other parts of the world as well. So that's what I was trying to get at with some of the behavioral stuff. Direct sales have gone, but partner sales are through the roof because the advisors are getting asked for all this help. Why wouldn't they just buy the solution in? But I just thought I'd feed that back because it was quite interesting. And then the other anecdote was, apart from EasyJet, it was the employment lawyer that got hacked, that has Lady Gaga and Madonna as one of their customers, and Trump. That's when I got loads of inquiries from customers about cybersecurity after the employment lawyer hack. So maybe we could factor that into the UK cybersecurity strategy from 2020. Sorry, I had to add that. But you've got to have a laugh on these things.
As we enter the last 10 minutes, if anyone's got any further questions, do raise your hand or put them in the chat. I suppose I'd just like to kind of get the panel's thoughts on the kind of public-private partnerships that we have in the UK in terms of how our industry works hand in hand with government. And you know, I don't want to dig too deep into the contact tracing debate because we just don't have time, but I thought it was quite encouraging to see NCSC having these debates in public. You know, these are long-standing and entrenched debates around privacy versus security, and you know, we've suddenly had to accelerate the way that we're dealing with them. But I think from my point of view, it was good to see, you know, Ian Levy talking about it in public and explaining the thinking on that. I don't know what your thoughts are. Sian?
Yeah, I think it's good to see the debate and the fact that people are engaging and explaining it, and yeah, it's a very emotive emphasize. I mean, obviously Microsoft, we published like 7 principles of how to develop an app with privacy, and it's good to see that debate around what people should look at happening. And yeah, other than that, I'm just interested to see what happens rather than commenting more specifically on the app. Yeah.
Raj?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's good that the government are being transparent, and if they weren't, the cynic in me thinks we could just get it through a Freedom of Information Act anyway request. But that aside, it's good. It's good they're sharing it. However, there are some key privacy issues around that. So yeah, I agree with Sian. I'll take the more on the fence response and just say, let's see what happens.
And James?
Well, it's punchy stuff, isn't it? You know, again, we're in a place that we didn't think we'd be a few months ago, where the government is asking for information to find out things about you that you wouldn't otherwise share. So I think at the start we said any government worth its salt needs to clearly communicate why any measures are necessary. Why they're proportionate, all of that standard language is very important. But, it is a unique situation. So I think probably, look at all the stats for lockdown, and people seem to be wanting to be kept locked down. So I'd imagine, similar things, is people are quite happy to give over their information if it keeps them safe. And it's remarkable to see how our mentality can change in a few weeks, because probably a couple of months ago, people would have gone wild if, one of the Conservative Party's manifesto pledges was to trace all its citizens. We'd go completely ballistic. So that's why, I mean, the feedback, that I think that NCRC did a feedback thing, which was quite important. So they released the technical details, took in the feedback. 3 things were reported. So, concerns about the registration process, Bluetooth communication standards. That's very interesting. You've got the Bluetooth turned on all the time. And data encryption. So I think that conversation needs to go on. And I think the key thing here is intelligence agencies used to hide everything and not be able to tell you stuff. And it was all like, oh, this is the secret stuff. Well, in this world, that's not the case anymore. There's so many experts online who can find out all sorts of things. You just can't operate like that anymore. So pat on the back for reaching out, but they probably had no choice as well.
Cheers. I'm 100% sure that we'll be talking about this for months to come. I'm going to give everyone that awkward 5 seconds if they want to unmute and ask a question, if anyone on the phone wants to ask a question. If not, I'm going to try and merge 3 of mine into one for a final question before we wrap up. Obviously, we're going to go into a period of severe economic difficulty after this finishes, and we've got the strategy next year that oversees everything that UK government does on cybersecurity. We're going to see, a growing sector continue to need the right skills, and to do that requires investment from industry and government. And then the SME sector that's been so vibrant in the UK in the last 10 or so years is probably going to be hardest hit in terms of, that investment maybe isn't as easily available as it has been. So I don't know if, you guys want to comment on what you see needing to happen as part of that strategy process. James, I'm going to pick on you first.
Oh, that's fine. So I think that there's clearly going to be some problems, and prosperity is going to be quite important. So we talk about prosperity.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
Someone's exited. All right, so prosperity and economic security and cybersecurity kind of come hand in hand, and that's been the whole thing about protecting UK PLC, making the UK a safe place to do business online, etc., etc. I just think that's probably just got to continue. So, to keep cybersecurity and prosperity kind of together, and part of that is protecting the sector and really giving it, underpinning it with the necessary investment, not scaling things back and doing things on the cheap, but like pushing forward. And that's what the next strategy is for. So time will tell whether that happens, and that will probably spill over into a range of policy areas, right? Because we're all waiting to see what government's going to do next with coronavirus, Brexit on the horizon, although it's apparently already happened. You know what I mean? But yeah, so we'll see what's going to happen. But yeah, I think we're all focused on the cyber strategy, keeping skills going. What does the word mainstreaming mean, and all of those things. So time will tell. But everything's kind of on hold at the moment, if we're honest.
Sian?
Yeah, I think it's the challenge with any strategy in any area is that what plans that were made are all going to be very much affected out of this, and we still don't know what the real impact will be. So I think I agree with pretty much what James said. It's something to watch, and it is that as much as we can do to support our entire economy, SMEs upwards, in order to try and be successful, it's going to be important, I think, for us all as an industry to pull together.
And Raj, I'll give you the final word.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. Yeah, I think from an SME perspective, it's really important that we continue to engage with SMEs, and I think having organisations like techUK or individual companies, building up ecosystems is important to ensure that we have that future foresight for technology. But from an education perspective, universities are now moving to online only lectures. Therefore, the tools are available to ensure that people who have business space can be retrained. But ultimately, COVID-19 is will serve a global impact, and it's going to be interesting to see how that affects UK PLC, as not all of the business is done in the UK, it's done overseas as well, particularly in the Middle East and Far East. So it'll be interesting to see how those economies are changing, and also how global politics is changing as well, because sometimes that drives the need and demand for more robust cybersecurity.
Thanks, Raj. So that brings us to time, unfortunately. But just to say a big thank you to each of us three speakers for joining us. We've rattled through, touching on a lot of different issues that will continue to be talked about for the coming months. So techUK will be working on a lot of those in a bit more detail. So please do drop me a line if you want to get more involved. I should also mention as well that, as you'd expect, techUK's focus is now kind of 50% on business as usual and 50% on supporting efforts around COVID-19. And that's on both sides of the coin. So for my part, supporting businesses looking to, access better cybersecurity tools and products and skills and stuff like that, but also the wider teams looking a lot at how, businesses can access that government support that's available. So if any of that's of interest, do drop me or Sabina a line. And I think I'll just hand over to Sabina, who can confirm next week's session.
Yes, thanks from me too. That was definitely very interesting for someone who doesn't do cybersecurity on a daily or weekly basis. Next week will be economy. So we are looking at the future of the economy and the role of tech in that. So see you next week.
Great, thanks all, and stay safe.